How much faster is the brand new M2 Pro 16-inch MacBook Pro compared to the previous version, and how should that impact your buying decision? Because right now, the old version is $2,100 on Amazon. That's $400 savings, and if you get the 1 terabyte hard drive, that's $500 off compared to the M2 Pro. So in this video, we're gonna be comparing everything, including a bunch of different benchmark and real world tasks, including actually comparing things that other reviewers didn't mention, like speaker differences, which there are, at least we had with the 14-inch, and the webcam improvements as well. So let's get right into it. But before I do that, I do wanna mention that we're doing a giveaway of a new M2 Pro, MacBook Pro, and new Mac Mini, and all you have to do to enter is subscribe below, enable notifications, and comment down below to enter, and you can actually get more entries by commenting on all of our Mac videos this month, and we're gonna announce the winner on February 1st, so don't miss out on that video. Now in this video, we're also gonna be doing a battery life test, so they're both charged up to 100% right now, and I'm gonna go ahead and unplug them, and we should be expecting better battery life because of the extra efficiency cores, but we'll see. Now getting right into it, we have both base models, which means they're both $2,500 MSRP, but on the new one, we do have some advantages, including the new HDMI 2.1, which supports 4K at 240 Hertz, including 8K 60 displays, while the old one does not. And as a nice little bonus, the new ones do get a color-matched MagSafe 3 cable. Now, if you didn't see our SSD comparison video, the new ones do have a little bit of an issue where instead of 5 SSD NAND chips on the previous M1 Pro, we now get only 2 of them, which is leading to slower SSD speeds, up to 2 times slower for the read speed, and then that in turn led to worse memory swap performance in certain tasks that are very memory intensive, including Lightroom classic photo editing. And we got those bad results while multitasking with 15 Chrome tabs open, because before having those tabs open, the new M2 Pro was 13% faster, but then with the Chrome tabs, the old version was actually 17% faster, so it can have an impact in certain tasks, but not as bad in others like in video editing. Now, one thing that we noticed on the new 14-inch M2 Pro model was that the speakers actually got a little bit quieter and less sharp, so let's go ahead and test out the 16-inch models. But before I get into that, I've got to give a shout out to our sponsor, Terabox, the best free cloud storage app out there, with 1 terabyte of free cloud storage with no catch. So you can upload your files, photos, and videos to the cloud for free, including automated backup, large file transfer, personal vault, and Face ID password. And Terabox is also ISO IEC certified for cloud data security to keep your data safe. You can also try their premium version with a lower price that bumps it up to 2 terabytes, removes ads, and adds multi-speed video playback. So check out Terabox using the link below. And yep, it looks like we have the same thing on the 16-inch models. The new one cuts those highs down a little bit compared to the older one, which I prefer the older one for vocals and watching movies and everything else, so it's a little disappointing, but it's not that big of a difference. Now, one nice little update that Apple made to the M2 Pro MacBook Pro is that the webcam actually looks different. Even though it's the same 1080p webcam, the new M2 ISP, or image signal processor, is actually improving the quality, as you can see right here. And this is on the M1 Pro 16-inch, and you can see that it's not as sharp. The white balance is a little bit different. It looks like there's more noise reduction, so I do like the changes with the new M2 Pro model. And now let's get into the benchmark testing with Geekbench 5, and the first thing I want to point out is the clock speeds, which is now 3.48 on the M2 Pro compared to 3.22. That's about 10% higher, so we should expect at least that much of an improvement improvement in the single core. So let me go ahead and start the test. And I do want to mention that this year we do have double the efficiency cores, 4 instead of 2, and they're actually clocked higher as well. And I'll show you guys when we test out Cinebench. We have our scores back and it looks like we have 10% of an improvement on single core, just as expected. It lines up to the frequency improvement, and 21% on multi-core, which is slightly better than Apple's quoted 20%, so great improvement here. Now the nice thing about that single core improvement is that it should also boost your web browsing snappiness. So let's run Speedometer 2.0, which is a web browsing benchmark. And there you go, we have our scores, 422 for the M2 Pro compared to 368. That's almost a 15% improvement in web browser snappiness. That's actually really nice, and a lot of people say that might not make a big difference or a big deal, but there are apps that are web browser based, so all of those will be improved. And actually, let's go ahead and run Figma, which is a web browser based app. Now this Figma project right here is basically what a web designer would do to create web pages, and it's provided to us by 500 Designs, which is one of the best design companies out there. So here I'm basically just gonna zoom in to test how fast it loads up. I believe, yep, there you go. Just a couple of seconds and it's nice and sharp. Let's do it on the other machine. And whoa, it almost did seem like it loaded faster, like I didn't even see it in low res. And now let's go ahead and export these 12 layers, which is gonna be a standardized benchmark for us going into the future. So I'm gonna click export. And there you go, we have our times. It looks like the M1 Pro took 1 minute and 49 seconds compared to 1 minute and 36. So that makes the new M2 Pro 13.5% faster for Figma web design. And now let's get into the Geekbench 5 Metal Graphics benchmark. And the interesting difference this year is that the M2 Pro now has 19 GPU cores compared to 16 on the M1 Pro, both upgraded and non-binned. So let's run this. And there you go, we have our scores, and it looks like the M2 Pro is around 26% faster. So let's go ahead and test some real world applications like GFXBench, the gaming test. Now we usually run the 1440p Aztec Ruins high tier off screen test, but this time we're gonna add in the 4K test, which is new. The test is finished and it looks like we have 28% faster for the 4K test on the M2 Pro and 29% on the 1440p test. So it's basically around the same performance difference, close to 30% like Apple quoted. And now just for good measure, let's go ahead and test out 3D Mark's Wildlife Extreme on unlimited mode, because I think that did push a little bit more power previously, so let's test it out. Now while this is running, I went ahead and turned on Acetop provided to us by Timothy Liu, and it looks like the actual clock speed of the GPU is running 8% higher on the M2 Pro compared to the M1 Pro. And another difference I noticed was actually the peak wattage, where the M2 Pro hit 27.14 watts compared to 22.72 on the M1 Pro. That's actually a 20% increase in peak wattage for the GPU cores. And now looking at the actual cores, that 20% boost in wattage gave us 26% higher FPS. So still pretty good, but still not reaching the 30% that Apple quoted. And now let's get into Cinebench R23, which is gonna put a 100% load onto the CPU, basically a CPU rendering load. So I'm gonna go ahead and get a baseline reading of the temps. So right here, you can see we have 33 degrees Celsius right there, hotspot on the M1 Pro. And on the M2 Pro, basically the same thing, 32, 33. So let's go ahead and start the 10-minute test. And I do have MX Power Gadget, which is basically Intel Power Gadget brought back to Apple Silicon. Thank you, Ben Bajarin on Twitter. And look at that, we are using more power. 35 watts on the M2 Pro compared to 28 right now. We have higher clock speed right there. You can see the performance cores 3.26 compared to 3.04. The E-cores, the efficiency cores, 2.42 compared to 2.06. And the temps are rising faster as well. Look at that. Looking at TG Fan Pro, we have 95 degrees Celsius compared to 85. Now, one difference is the M1 Pro, the fans are off right now, whereas the M2 Pro has actually turned them on 1400 RPM right now. And 100 degrees Celsius we just hit on the M2 Pro, while the M1 didn't even hit 90 yet. Now, one thing that nobody has mentioned yet so far on YouTube is that the M2 Pro allows the fan speed to ramp higher. Look at that, 5,700 RPM on the right side, 5,300 on the left, compared to 4,700 and 4,300 on the M1 Pro, so 1,000 RPM higher. Now, it's been running for about 6.5 minutes, and one thing that I've noticed is the actual CPU wattage on the M2 Pro, which is actually around 27% more wattage compared to the M1 Pro. So it's gonna be interesting to see how big of an actual improvement we get in this test. So now that we're past 8 minutes in this test, let's take another reading from the thermal camera. We have 43 degrees Celsius on the M1 Pro, the hottest spot right there. And then moving over, we have, oh, look at that, 45 degrees Celsius. And there you go, we have our scores, 13,664 on the M2 Pro compared to 11,305. That's basically 21% faster on the new machine. However, it did have to use about 27% more power to get that 21% higher score. And that could easily make a difference in the actual battery life that you experience with the new M2 Pro. So don't forget that. We're gonna reveal the differences at the end. So let's go ahead and run a stress test where we run Cinebench R23 at the same time as Wildlife Extreme, putting 100% workload on the CPU and GPU at the same time. Oh, we just hit 108 degrees. You can see that right now on the M2 Pro. Wow, and the clock speeds are actually getting cut down. Look at that, instead of 3.26, we're now at 3.03, basically the same as the M1 Pro machine. The fans are now kicking up, I can actually hear them, over 3,500 on the M2 Pro, at about 3,400 on the M1 Pro. The clock speed kicked back up on the performance cores on the M2 Pro, but you can see that the GPU clock speed is now down a little bit compared to what it was before, 1.38, 1.39. So the test is finished, and this time we have 19% faster for the M2 Pro. And the nice thing is that we didn't hit the peak 5,700 RPM that it can go up to now. And I think that's actually meant for the M2 Max chip, which can go up to 38 cores on the GPU. And that machine might actually throttle based on what we just saw, so definitely subscribe so you don't miss out on that video. And now that we have thermals and Cinebench out of the way, let's move on to some real world workflows, including some Xcode programming, testing the Xcode benchmark from Maxim Ermenko. I got the terminal script ready right here, and by the way, if you want to see what's inside of this actual test, just look up Xcode benchmark online. There you go, it's starting up. And we can already see these CPUs ramping up right here. You got 99% CPU usage, so it's going full blast. And there you go, we have our scores, and it looks like the new M2 Pro finished in 70 seconds, which is insanely fast, especially for a base machine, compared to 90 seconds on the old M1 Pro. So there's definitely a great difference here for programmers. And now let's get to testing music production with the Logic Pro benchmark, which you can actually download and test yourself on this website, and it has specific information and steps that you should take to run the test correctly. So basically within Logic, you go into the settings, you go to advanced and turn on the complete features, then go back to audio, set it to 1024 buffer size, and choose the maximum amount of processing threads, which we have 12 here because of the extra efficiency cores. Then you hit apply. So basically, the point of this test is to test out the system's stability and how much CPU usage it has, because if it overloads the CPU, it is going to crash when you're doing your music production. So far with 128 tracks on each, it is doing just fine, and it has to get through the entire thing without overloading and stopping to pass the test. All right, it just passed on both, no issues at all. Let's add some more tracks. And now let's test it out with 150 tracks, and now it should be kicking up that CPU a lot more. As you can see, we're sitting at 72% right now. All right, it's almost done, and it looks like 87 degrees Celsius, still not even bad on this M2 Pro. And now let's go for 180. Oh, they both overloaded almost right away. So 180 is too much. I've just disabled 10 of them, 170, let's try that out. Oh, the M1 Pro just overloaded, and the M2 Pro is still going. Fans are kicking up. Oh, it did overload though. The M2 Pro lasted a little bit longer, but overloaded. Let's take some more off. 165 on each. The fans actually kicked up on the M2 Pro, still off on the M1 Pro, 97 degrees towards the end of this. And it looks like they both made it with 165. And look at that, 167, no problem on both. 168. Oh, there you go, M1 Pro just failed. Can the M2 make it? And it just finished at 103 degrees Celsius, got super hot, but basically both of them failed at 170 tracks. However, the M2 Pro did 169, just barely, while the M1 Pro did 168. So there's basically no difference. And the reason for that is because this M2 Pro is overclocked. It's using 28% more wattage to get 21% more performance in Cinebench. So it's using more watts and it basically makes it kind of unstable. So it's around the same performance in this test. And now let's get into photo editing with Lightroom Classic. As you can see, I have 50 raw 42 megapixel images open right here, and I can kind of cycle through them to show them to you guys. What I'm gonna do is do an export test because basically in terms of snappiness and editing, they're both basically the same. I got the same export settings on both of them for 50 images. Let's hit export and start the timer. Now this is a memory intensive program or test to run with photo editing because there's a lot of files being written, a lot of data going back and forth, and I can actually show you in the activity monitor how there is a lot of memory swap being used. We can see right here that the M2 Pro is using 5.5 gigs of swap compared to 2.7 on the M1 Pro, and that is going to be impacted by the whole SSD situation if you have the base SSD that's a little bit slower. And there you go, the test is finished. We have our scores, and it looks like the M2 Pro MacBook Pro finished in 1 minute and 1 second, compared to 1 minute and 11 seconds on the M1 Pro. So that's about 10 seconds faster. And there should be a bigger difference, but because we have that swap with the slower SSDs, it's not as fast. Now, if we actually had some Chrome tabs open, like in the previous video, we had 15 of them, it actually gets slowed down like crazy, and the M2 Pro ends up being slower than the M1 Pro. So keep that in mind, and if you want to avoid that, if you're a photo editor, just get the 1 terabyte SSD at least. And now here we have the Affinity Photo 2 benchmark, which is going to test the CPU performance and the GPU performance for photo editing work that's actually very well optimized. And as far as the GPU, we have 32% faster in terms of the graphics for photo editing. And now let's get into Blender 3D rendering, which is going to be testing out the GPU performance difference between these two. This is doing cycles with the GPUs. Let's click render image. All right, guys, this is crazy. The M2 Pro has been finished for a little bit, and the M1 Pro is still going. I can't believe it. 100% GPU usage, so it's using it just fine. It's still going with this test. Holy moly, guys, it is done. I can't believe the result this time around. The M2 Pro finished in 50 seconds, yes, 50, compared to 1 minute and 58.6 seconds on the M1 Pro. That is over twice as fast for 3D rendering. This ain't no 30% gain. Over twice as fast for Blender 3D rendering. That is absolutely insane. Such a huge improvement. And one interesting thing I'm noticing is that on the M2 Pro, it says the peak memory usage is 2,700 on the M2 Pro and only 1,424 on the M1 Pro. What if that's Apple's built-in tile-based memory that they added to the M2 Pro chip? Because if you look at the die images, there is a lot of extra transistors in the M2 Pro's GPU, not including the cores themselves compared to the previous M1 Pro. So this is a killer 3D rendering upgrade. And now let's get into video editing with Final Cut Pro. The first test we're gonna do is our standard H.264 4K export. So this is a 5-minute project. And since HEVC is so popular right now, we're just gonna do the HEVC as the final format. And there you go, they both finished 2 minutes and 52 seconds. No difference whatsoever for H.264 to HEVC, which is the most common formats that people use for video editing. And since it didn't matter for those codecs, those formats, let's do ProRes RAW, which is high intensity. So let's go ahead and test this out, and it should also have ProRes encoders, so we'll see if it makes any difference at all. And there you go, we have our scores. It took exactly a minute for the M2 Pro, and it took a minute and 5 seconds for the M1 Pro. Practically no real world difference here, even with the 5-minute project. And now to finish off with a bang, we have Canon R5 8K RAW, which is extremely insane. It's a very heavy codec that should not be supported by the decoders, at least. We're gonna encode into HEVC and see the difference. Let's get started. Right off the bat, both of the GPUs fully maxed out, as you can see right there, and the CPU is getting hit at the same time. So this is a very good mixed use case test. And look at that, we're already at over 100 degrees Celsius, 103 right there, 105. Wow, it is heating up, while this one's still at 89. Wow, look, 106. There you go, I'm hearing the fan kick up on the M2 Pro, over 3,000 RPM compared to 1,500, basically idle on the M1 Pro. And just because I'm curious, I'm turning on MX Power Gadget to monitor exactly what's going on here. Right here, it looks like we're using about 49 watts of power compared to 42 on the M1 Pro. That's 16% more in terms of the actual wattage. The GPU frequency is stuck at 1.4 gigahertz compared to 1.3, which is good. It's still full blast without any throttling so far. Now keep in mind, we did hit 106 degrees maximum, and now it's cooled down to about 101. This is actually the test we ran on the M2 MacBook Air that got it to thermal throttle like crazy when it hit 108 degrees Celsius. So if you're gonna have the M2 Max chip, then you might actually see some throttling because it has double the GPU cores. It's gonna use a lot more wattage. It might actually throttle, and especially on the 14-inch MacBook Pro with the M2 Max 38 core. Definitely subscribe so you don't miss out on that video. And finally, the test is finished. It looks like the M2 Pro finished in 8 minutes and 17 seconds compared to 10 minutes and 7 seconds. So a minute and 50 seconds longer. Finally, we found a test where the M2 Pro got a huge advantage, but this is extreme. This is an extreme test. Most likely you'll be going for the M2 Max if you're doing crazy stuff like this, but it's nice to see that we did get an improvement. So now, after hours of testing, let's finally take a look at the difference in battery life. On the M1 Pro, we are left with 11% right now and 12% for the M2 Pro machine. So basically no difference. And with that said, I finally have my conclusion between these two machines. If you already have an M1 Pro or M1 Max MacBook Pro from 2021, do not upgrade. It is not worth it. Yes, you get 15 to 20% gains in certain things, maybe even up to 30, but I don't think it's that big of a deal, at least not enough to actually upgrade if you already have one of these. Now, there is one task where I think it could actually be worth it if you already have an M1 Pro, and that is Blender 3D rendering over twice as fast. That is killer, and it can help you if you do a lot of 3D rendering. But for everything else, it's not that big of a difference, especially since we have the same designs, the same ports, the same displays, same everything between these two generations. Sure, HDMI 2.1, that could be a big deal if you already have a really nice display that can support it, but is it really worth upgrading? I mean, the speakers are kind of cut down in terms of the highs. Yes, the webcam is a little bit better with the processing, but spending that much money again on an M2 Pro, I don't think it's worth it for almost everybody. Now, if you skipped these M1 Pro and Max machines, now this is a great time to upgrade if you need a lot of performance. You're gonna get those extra gains and the better specs like Bluetooth 5.3, Wi-Fi 6E, all of that could be very enticing for you, and that could be a good time to buy. But here's the dilemma. If you don't have either of these machines yet, should you actually just go for an M1 Pro machine right now? Because you can find them discounted like crazy, hundreds of dollars off, $2,100 for this 16-inch base instead of $2,500, or if you get the 1TB SSD, you're saving $500 compared to MSRP. So some people might just want to do that if they don't care about those extra updates to the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth specs, HDMI, all of that. That might actually be a good idea for you. So let me know what you think about this comparison down in the comment section below. And if you want to check out the deals on the M1 Pro machines, use the YouTube tagging feature. Definitely click subscribe because we're making a lot of videos with our 12 new 2023 Macs. So we have a lot of testing to do. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.